Hey everyone! Just a quick reminder to subscribe and hit that like button if you're enjoying my stories. It really helps me know you're into the content. Thanks for tuning in, and let's dive right in. It's funny how life doesn't turn out the way you imagine as a kid. Back then, I thought I'd be a world-famous artist, traveling the globe and leaving my mark on gallery walls everywhere. But here I was, clutching a greasy schedule for my new night shift at a 24/7 fast food drive-thru, wondering where things had gone so wrong. School was never my thing. I wasn't athletic or academically gifted, and I had a knack for making friends with the worst people. That's probably what led to, well, let's just say a tragedy with one of those friends forced me to reevaluate everything. Art had always been my escape. After that night, it became my lifeline. I threw myself into sketching, painting, tattooing practice skins, anything to keep my hands moving and my mind quiet. Somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't just want to do art. I wanted to make a living with it. Becoming a tattoo artist felt right, like the first real goal I'd ever set for myself. But dreams cost money, and I had none. Supplies, courses, even gas to get to a studio, all of it added up fast. And since I wasn't exactly drowning in job offers, this fast food gig was the best option I could find. Nights worked better for me anyway. Fewer people, fewer questions, more time to draw in between orders. When I showed up for my first shift, I wasn't sure what to expect. The restaurant had that overly clean but somehow sticky vibe all fast food places seem to have. A few customers were still hanging around the lobby, but the night manager, a short guy with tired eyes and a shirt that screamed corporate didn't send me enough staff, quickly waved me into the back. "Aria, right?" he asked, barely glancing at me as he handed me a crumpled name tag. "Good. We're short-handed, so I'm gonna skip the whole welcome to the team speech. You'll be on Drive-Thru tonight. Tara's up front, Luis is on grill." Tara turned out to be a bubbly girl with dyed purple hair and a constant fidget in her hands. "First night?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Don't worry. Nights are usually quiet. Usually." Luis, on the other hand, was the exact opposite. He was tall, quiet, and so focused on chopping lettuce that he barely acknowledged my existence. I got the sense he'd been here a long time, though. His movements were sharp, efficient, like he'd been running this kitchen in his sleep for years. The manager handed me a laminated sheet of paper titled Rules for Night Staff and told me to memorize it. Most of the rules were obvious. Keep the back door locked, only turn the lights on when necessary, don't leave the register unattended. But then there were the other rules. If a man in a dark brown coat and hat comes through the drive-thru, tell him to leave. Do not take his order. If a woman in a red mini asks for X, give her Y instead. She'll know the difference, but don't question it. The silent family will drive up occasionally. They will not speak. Take their written order, fulfill it exactly, and don't look at them for too long. "What the hell is this?" I asked, holding up the paper. "Is this some kind of prank?" Tara and Luis exchanged a glance. "Nope," Tara said a little too quickly. "Just follow the rules, okay? People get weird at night." Luis grunted something in agreement but didn't look up from his station. I laughed nervously, trying to gauge if they were joking. "What happens if you don't follow the rules? Do they, complain to corporate or something?" "Something," Tara said, her smile fading. Before I could ask more, the manager clapped his hands. "Clock in, people. Let's go." The first few hours passed without incident. The dining room closed at 10, leaving only the occasional car rolling through the drive-thru. I didn't mind the quiet. It gave me time to sketch between orders. I even started doodling a new tattoo design, a snake coiled around an old-school microphone. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The fluorescent lights buzzed too loud, and the shadows in the back storage room felt darker than they should. Every creak and clatter made me jump, but Tara and Luis acted like it was normal. Around 2 a.m., I finally worked up the nerve to ask Tara about the rules again. "Seriously," I said over the walkie-talkie we used to communicate. "What's the deal with that list? Do you actually get people like that?" Her voice crackled back. "Look, it's just easier if you don't overthink it. Follow the rules, and you'll be fine." Luis chimed in for the first time all night. "Better not to question things," he said, his voice low and serious. That didn't exactly calm my nerves, but I decided to drop it. If this was some kind of weird hazing ritual, I'd play along, for now. The rest of the shift was quiet, almost eerily so. The only customers were a couple of tired truckers and a mom with a screaming baby. When my shift finally ended, I clocked out and walked to my car, the laminated rules still tucked in my pocket. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had been the calm before the storm. Something told me I hadn't seen the worst of this place yet. The second night was eerily quiet, too quiet. There's this moment in the evening when it feels like time itself slows down, and all you hear is the faint hum of the fryer or the rustle of paper bags. It's almost peaceful. Almost. I was still trying to get used to the rhythm of the place. The shift was like the night before, but the unease from those rules I'd been handed lingered in the back of my mind. Every time I saw a shadow flicker in the corner of the room, or heard a car roll up to the window, I'd catch myself holding my breath, waiting for something strange to happen. And sure enough, it didn't take long. Around 11 p.m., an old lady in a bright red Mini pulled up to the drive-thru. I could see her through the speaker. Round glasses, white curls, and a vaguely hunched posture. She looked harmless enough, but there was something about the way she gripped the wheel, like she was holding on to something she shouldn't be. She ordered the usual, a burger and fries, with no special requests. No big deal. But then I remembered the rule. The one about the red Mini. I could feel my palms sweat as I glanced at the laminated sheet. Give her the alternative order, not the one she asks for. It didn't specify why, but it was clear from Tara and Luis's warnings that I wasn't supposed to question it. I took a deep breath and repeated her order back to her through the speaker. Okay, that'll be a burger with pickles and a side of fries. Please drive up. I had no idea if I was giving her exactly what she wanted, but the rule was the rule. I handed the bag to her as she rolled down the window, and I couldn't help but glance at her face. Her eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone her age, and she stared at the bag for a long moment. I felt my stomach twist. Was I supposed to do something else? Was I going to get in trouble for giving her the wrong thing? Then she grunted, clearly displeased. "You're not listening, child," she muttered, voice raspy, "but this'll do for now." And with that, she drove off. No confrontation, no strange incident, just an old woman in a red car vanishing into the night. I stood there for a moment, feeling a little shaky. Did I really do that right? I glanced over at Tara and Luis, but neither of them seemed fazed. They were already back at their posts. Luis was flipping burgers with his usual mechanical precision, and Tara was scanning the dining area like she always did. I couldn't stop thinking about the old lady and the rule. I felt like there was something I wasn't getting, something bigger. But I didn't have time to dwell on it for long. Another car rolled up. The third night, I thought I'd seen everything I needed to see. Quiet customers, a few late-night drunks, and a strange order or two. But then, a man in a dark brown coat and hat pulled into the drive-thru. I didn't need to be reminded of the rule this time. I knew exactly what to do. I couldn't see his face because of the way his hat tilted down, but there was something about him that made my heart skip a beat. Maybe it was the way he sat so still, not even moving to adjust his seat as he waited. Maybe it was just my imagination. I cleared my throat and picked up the speaker. "Hi, how can I help you tonight?" His voice was low, too low, like he didn't really want to be heard. "A large fry and a soda," he said. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The rule was clear. Do not serve him. Tell him to leave. "Sorry, sir," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We're actually closing up for the night." I glanced at the clock. An hour until shift change. We're not taking orders anymore. There was a long pause. A long, uncomfortable silence. The man didn't say a word. I could only hear the hum of the microphone, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, without a word, he slowly turned his wheel and drove off. I didn't breathe again until I heard the car's engine fade into the distance. Luis and Tara didn't say anything. They hadn't been near the window, but I could feel the tension thick in the air. Something about the way Tara looked at me, like she knew what I had just done, or what I had avoided. "I'm not sure why, but it's better not to engage with him," Luis said quietly, breaking the silence. His voice was distant, like he wasn't really talking to me, but more to himself. Tara glanced at him, and then at me, her expression unreadable. "You did good. Just don't let your guard down," she added. I stared at them, but they didn't elaborate. The unease I felt earlier came rushing back. I wanted answers. More than anything, I wanted to understand why these rules were so damn important. But Tara only shrugged. Look, don't worry about it. You'll get used to it. I don't think I will, I muttered under my breath. The rest of the night passed without any more strange customers, but the tension never fully left. I kept glancing at the clock, the speaker, the shadowy corner where the kitchen met the back hallway. It felt like someone was watching me, even when there was no one around. And when it was finally time to clock out, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief that the shift was over, but dread because I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled deeper into something I didn't understand. As I drove home, I thought about the old lady, the man in the brown coat, and the strange rules I had been forced to follow. What would happen if I didn't follow them? What would happen if I made a mistake? I didn't have any answers, but I had a nagging feeling that I was going to find out soon enough. By the fourth shift, I started getting used to the routine. The weirdness of the rules was always in the back of my mind, but I'd told myself that if I kept my head down, everything would be fine. There was a strange kind of comfort in the repetition of the orders, the low hum of the fryers, the soft clatter of the grill. It almost felt like I was becoming part of the place, part of the machinery. But then, things started to get weirder. It was around midnight when I first saw them. The silent family. A beat-up, old station wagon rolled into the drive-thru, the kind of car you see on the road for years, like it's been patched up with whatever was lying around. Inside were 4 people, 2 adults in the front and 2 kids in the back. The kids were pressed up against the windows, staring at me with wide, unblinking eyes. They didn't say a word. When the car stopped at the window, the mother, if she was the mother, didn't speak. She just slowly held up a small piece of paper with their order written on it. Exact words, no substitutions. The rule flashed through my mind like a neon sign. Don't speak to them. Fulfill their order exactly. Don't break the silence. I didn't even glance at them for too long. I took the note, read it, and started putting the order together. A burger with no pickles, fries with extra salt, and a side of chicken nuggets. The kids didn't blink. The adults didn't move. I placed the bag on the counter and handed it to the man who had barely shifted in his seat. He didn't make eye contact, just reached over and took the food, never saying a word. The moment they drove off, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Something about the silence had felt wrong, unnaturally still. The air seemed thicker, as if something was pressing down on me, and it made my skin crawl. I looked over at Luis and Tara. They both acted like nothing had happened. Luis didn't even glance up from his grill, flipping a patty with his usual precision. Tara gave me a small, knowing smile, but said nothing. It wasn't the last of the strange customers. The next one to show up was the laughing teen. A car pulled up, and before I even heard his voice, I could hear the laughter. High-pitched, almost manic, like he was losing his mind. I didn't even have to ask what he wanted. His order came between bursts of hysterical laughter. I want a large fry, and a cola, and a cheeseburger, no onions. He was shaking with laughter the entire time, his voice echoing through the drive-thru speaker. The rule for him was simple. Do not acknowledge the laughter. Take the order seriously. I swallowed, my throat dry. I repeated the order back to him, word for word, without acknowledging the laugh. I could feel his eyes on me through the speaker, but I refused to glance away. I wasn't sure what would happen if I did, but I didn't want to find out. Large fry, cola, and a cheeseburger, no onions, I said flatly. His laughter grew louder, more erratic. Yes, that's right. I handed him the food without a word, and just like that, he sped off into the night, still laughing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong. I couldn't explain it, but something about that encounter felt off. Like the man wasn't laughing because he was having fun, but because there was something darker at play. I turned to Tara after the car had driven off. She was watching me, her eyes sharp. You're doing all right, she said softly. But you need to remember, always follow the rules, never question them. I hesitated, biting my lip. I was starting to get it. There was something deeper to all of this, something real. But I couldn't just let it go. I needed to know more. Tara must have seen the look in my eyes, because later that night, she pulled me aside when things were quiet. You're getting curious, she said, her voice low. And that's fine. I get it. But you have to understand, this place, it's not like the outside world. It's not like anything you've ever known. There are things that happen here when the rules get broken. Bad things. She looked around before continuing, her voice barely a whisper. I've been here longer than you. I've seen it happen. I've almost made the mistake of breaking the rules myself, but I didn't. And that's the only reason I'm still here. My pulse quickened. What do you mean, bad things? Tara glanced down at her hands, fiddling with the edge of her apron. She didn't meet my gaze. I don't fully understand it. No one does. But there's something about the rules. They're not just guidelines, they're protection. If you break them, things get worse. Worse than just losing your job. I've seen things I can't explain, and I know they'll come for you if you don't follow them. Her words left a cold knot in my stomach. I'd seen her act like she knew something, like she was hiding a secret. But now it was clear. There was more to this place than I had thought. The night stretched on, and I couldn't shake what Tara had said. What had she seen? What did she mean by things? I began noticing more than I had before. Things I hadn't paid attention to on previous shifts. For one, the restaurant's security cameras were glitching. It was subtle, but enough that I could see things flicker in the footage. Shadows where there shouldn't be any. Faces appearing in the corners of the frames, even when the dining area was empty. I tried to convince myself it was just bad equipment, but the more I watched, the more I wondered if something else was going on. The strange noises I had heard in the back. Was that normal? The quiet scratching at the walls? The occasional clink of something metal that couldn't be explained? I couldn't keep pretending it was all fine. Something was wrong here. Something was very wrong. But I couldn't break the rules. I wouldn't break the rules, or so I told myself. As the clock ticked past 3 a.m., I realized there was only one way to truly find out what was going on. I had to test the rules. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I felt the weight of it settle like a cold hand on my chest. What would happen if I did break them? Was I really ready to find out? It's funny how quickly everything can go from calm to chaotic. I've worked enough late shifts to know that weird things happen at night, but nothing could have prepared me for what went down that evening. It started with the sound of a loud engine, something powerful and heavy rolling up. I looked out the window just in time to see a large tourist bus pulling into the parking lot. The headlights cut through the darkness, casting eerie shadows across the lot. And I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. Tara's voice crackled through the walkie-talkie moments later. Arya, we're gonna need your help up front. We've got a big crowd coming in, and I can't manage it all by myself. I didn't even have time to process it before I found myself walking to the front of the restaurant, pulling my apron tighter around my waist. It was one of those nights when everything felt a little off, like the universe was bending itself in strange ways. The tourists weren't helping. There was something unsettling about the way they all shuffled inside, their voices muffled but loud enough to cut through the dim glow of the overhead lights. I could hear Tara trying to keep them calm, but the confusion was spreading. The bus was full, way more people than I expected, and every table in the dining area was soon occupied. I was taking orders at the drive-thru, trying to manage everything at once, when I heard the telltale sound of a car pulling up. Without thinking, I grabbed the mic and asked the customer what they wanted, focusing entirely on getting the order right. It wasn't until the car rolled up to the window that I realized who it was. The old lady in the red Mini. For a moment, everything slowed down. I stood there, staring at her car as she rolled down the window, the usual thick silence settling in. Then, I did what I had been trained to do. I handed her the bag with the wrong order. The alternative. I didn't even think twice about it. I was too busy looking at the crowd in front of me, too distracted by the noise and chaos of the tourists to focus on what I was doing in the drive-thru. But the moment I handed her the bag, something felt wrong. The lady's eyes narrowed as she stared at the bag for a long time. She didn't speak, but I could feel the tension crackling in the air. Something was off. And then, without a word, she drove away. I turned back to the counter, thinking I was in the clear. But only a few minutes later, I heard the sound of the front door slamming open, followed by the unmistakable scream of a woman. I turned around just in time to see her, the old lady, storming into the restaurant, her hands gripping a long, sharp knife. The entire place erupted in panic. People screamed, scattering in all directions, knocking over chairs and tables. Luis rushed out from the kitchen, his eyes wide with shock as he tried to block her path. But she was relentless, swinging the knife wildly. I froze for a moment, my heart hammering in my chest. I could hear her shrill, shrieking voice. "You gave me the wrong order." The knife glinted in the dim light as she swung it, narrowly missing Luis. I didn't know what to do. People were running, crowding by the back doors, trying to get out of the way. Tara was behind the register, too stunned to react. I grabbed the nearest phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking. "Please, you have to send someone. She's attacking everyone. She has a knife." I barely even registered the sound of the operator's voice before I saw the old lady make a run for it. She turned and bolted out the door, disappearing into the night before the police could even get here. The restaurant was in chaos. The tourists, terrified, rushed to their buses, tripping over themselves to escape the madness. Some of them didn't even stop to grab their bags. I could hear the faint sound of the bus doors closing and the engine starting as it pulled out of the lot, leaving a wake of confusion behind it. Luis and Tara came back to the counter, visibly shaken. Tara was gripping the counter, her knuckles white. She looked over at Luis, then at me, and finally spoke, her voice quiet. I didn't think the rules were real," she whispered. "I thought it was all just superstition, you know? But now I'm not so sure." Luis nodded slowly, his face pale. "I've been here longer than both of you, and I thought I was doing things right too. But after tonight..." He let the sentence hang in the air. I could feel my heart thudding in my chest. The adrenaline from the chaos was still coursing through my veins, but now it was mixed with something else, something darker. What had just happened? Tara's eyes locked onto mine. "We have to follow the rules, Arya. There's no other choice. You saw what happened." I nodded, my mind spinning. The old lady's attack was just the beginning, wasn't it? There were more rules, more strange customers, and now that I had seen firsthand what could happen when they were ignored, I couldn't unsee it. I didn't even realize I'd given her the wrong order," I said, my voice shaky. "I thought I was following the rule." Tara sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's not just about following the rules, it's about knowing when you're supposed to break them, and when you're not. That's what makes this place different. It's all about balance, Arya." I couldn't process it all. It felt like the ground beneath me was shifting, the world I knew warping into something that didn't make sense. I had never believed in anything supernatural, not until tonight. But now, it felt like the rules weren't just rules. They were laws. Laws that had to be obeyed if I wanted to keep my sanity, if I wanted to keep my job, if I wanted to keep surviving. I looked over at Tara and Luis, both of them now staring at me with the same tension in their eyes. We were all in this together now. There was no turning back. And as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. Something worse than what we'd just experienced. Something we weren't prepared for. We had to stick to the rules. We had no choice. The night was suffocating. The air felt thick, as though the walls of the restaurant were closing in, and I could feel a chill creeping down my spine that hadn't been there before. I tried to shake it off, but the longer I worked, the more I couldn't ignore the sense that something was off. It was already too late to go back. The rules had been broken, and with each misstep, the consequences were starting to show. It started innocently enough. A few customers trickling in. Nothing too out of the ordinary. I was half distracted by the usual rush, trying to keep up with orders, checking the screen, handing bags through the drive-thru window. It wasn't until he pulled up that I felt the first wave of dread hit me. The man in the brown coat. I didn't notice it at first, my focus too divided between the register and the phone ringing in the kitchen. But when I handed him the bag, just like any other customer, I saw it. The coat was slightly different. It wasn't the dark brown coat from the rulebook. Not exactly. The cut was different, the fabric a little lighter. He was wearing a grayish-brown coat. But I didn't think much of it. Not until the lights flickered, and then went out completely. Darkness. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. The entire restaurant was suddenly submerged in pitch blackness. I could hear Tara's voice on the walkie-talkie, but it was garbled. distant. The hum of the machines had stopped. Even the fryer had gone silent. "Luis," I called, my voice shaking. "What's going on?" But there was no answer. For what felt like an eternity, we were suspended in this unnatural silence, stumbling around in the dark. My fingers grazed the counter, trying to find anything familiar. My eyes strained against the dark, seeing nothing. The power came back on, just as suddenly as it had cut out. The lights flickered to life, harsh and blinding, but I could still feel the lingering unease in my chest. My skin prickled, and I wasn't sure if it was from the cold air or the unease settling in my stomach. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. Luis appeared from the kitchen, his face pale. "What the hell just happened?" Tara walked over to the counter, rubbing her arms as though trying to shake off the same dread that had gripped me. She didn't say anything at first, just glanced toward the window. Where the man had driven off, we didn't talk about it. Not yet. It didn't take long before another strange customer showed up. The silent family. I didn't even recognize them at first. They slid into the drive-thru quietly, their station wagon old and faded, the windows rolled up tight. Their faces were mostly hidden in shadow as they gave me their order. They never spoke, not even when I greeted them. I took their written note with the exact details, no problem. I didn't even think about it. I took the order and handed the bag over, just like I was supposed to. But as they pulled away, I said, almost on instinct, "Thank you." I froze as the words left my mouth. I wasn't supposed to say that. Before I could think it through, I looked toward the back of the car. One of the family members turned his head, slowly, unnaturally far, to meet my eyes. His neck cracked as he twisted, the motion jerky, like something out of a nightmare. I swallowed, feeling my stomach twist into a tight knot. The car drove away, but the sense of unease only deepened. It wasn't until later that I heard the whispers. They started in the kitchen, barely audible at first. At first, I thought it was just the buzz of the fridge or the hum of the machines, but the voices were distinct. Low, muffled murmurs. Words I couldn't make out. I stood still for a second, listening, my pulse quickening. Luis was already in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with that same precise focus of his, like he couldn't hear what I was hearing. But I heard them. Whispers. Then came the laughing teen. I knew the rules with him. Never acknowledge the laughter. Stay serious, cold even. But Tara, she wasn't thinking clearly anymore. She chuckled nervously when she greeted him, trying to lighten the mood, but we all knew what had to happen. The fryer let out a loud pop, then another. Oil began to sputter from the deep fryer like a wild animal, spewing hot liquid in all directions. I screamed, instinctively rushing toward Tara to pull her away, but Luis was already there, tackling the fryer controls. He swore under his breath, trying to stop the chaos, but he was too slow. The oil splashed across the floor, narrowly missing his arm as he jerked back in time, but a few drops hit the side of his leg. Luis let out a pained yelp, clutching his leg as he backed away from the fryer. "Damn it!" Tara stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. Her nervous laugh had turned into wide-eyed shock. I didn't mean to." "No," I snapped. "We cannot break the rules, Tara. We can't." But it was already too late. The fryer was a mess now, oil pooling on the floor, sizzling and popping, the air thick with heat and the smell of burning. Luis hobbled out of the kitchen, his face flushed with pain. "I'll clean it up in a minute. Just stop breaking the damn rules." I could feel the panic tightening in my chest, growing with every passing minute. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice growing frantic. "Why didn't you warn me about what happens if we mess up?" Tara's face was pale, and she seemed to shrink into herself. "I don't know what happens, Arya, but I know that it gets worse. It always does." The tension in the restaurant was palpable. It was like the walls were closing in, the air growing heavier with every misstep. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. The worst part? We still had hours to go. The night wasn't over yet. I kept thinking about the rules, wondering if there was something we missed, something more we could do. But then I remembered what Tara had said earlier. We just have to survive. Survive the night. And suddenly, I wasn't so sure we could. The final hours of my shift dragged on like a never-ending nightmare, and the air inside the restaurant felt like it was thickening, suffocating me with every passing minute. Tara, Luis, and I were all on edge, barely speaking, our movements jerky and tense. We had learned the hard way that the rules weren't just guidelines, they were survival tactics. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Something we weren't understanding. And then, near the end of the shift, he showed up. A new customer, but this one wasn't on the list. A tall, shadowy figure. I glanced up from the counter and saw him standing at the drive-thru window, not moving, not speaking. His face was completely obscured in darkness, as though he was made of shadows himself. The light from the restaurant flickered across his form, but it felt like the darkness clung to him, refusing to let go. "Who is that?" I whispered, looking at Tara and Luis. But they were already watching him. "Don't engage," Luis said over the walkie-talkie. His voice was tight with fear. "Do not open the window. Stay away from him, Arya." I froze. My hand hovered over the mic. Was he a part of the rules? Had we missed something in the list? I couldn't explain it, but a sudden urge to know more surged inside me, overriding my better judgment. I took a shaky breath, not sure what I was doing as I grabbed the microphone. "Hey, can I help you?" I called through the drive-thru speaker. The figure didn't respond. Not a word, not a move. He just stared, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a hat I couldn't quite make out. His presence alone felt wrong, like something deep in my bones was telling me to turn and run, but I couldn't. "Arya, don't." Tara's voice crackled through the radio. "Get away from the window." But it was too late. I opened the window, feeling the cold rush of air blast against my face. The moment I looked at the figure again, he vanished, just gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the shaking. The entire restaurant trembled beneath me, as though it was being violently pulled apart from the inside. The lights above us flickered and buzzed. Glass rattled in its frames. A loud crash echoed from the kitchen. I turned just in time to see the utensils on the counter suddenly leap into the air and crash against the walls. Screams tore from my throat, but I barely heard myself over the sound of the chaos erupting around me. The door to the freezer slammed open, and the freezer lights began flashing rapidly. The deep fryer went berserk, spilling oil onto the floor again. The walls rattled as though they were about to collapse. The floor beneath my feet shook so violently I almost lost my balance. "Get to the kitchen," Luis shouted, his voice frantic. Tara grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the counter as another set of utensils flew across the room, embedding themselves into the far wall with terrifying force. We sprinted to the kitchen, slamming the door shut behind us. Luis immediately began to barricade it with whatever he could find: pots, pans, stacks of trays, anything to keep whatever was out there from getting in. In the kitchen, the atmosphere was even worse. The sound of things crashing outside, the buzzing of the lights, and the inexplicable noises, screeching, growling, whispers, filled the space. It felt like we were locked inside a nightmare, with no way out. "Stay quiet," Tara hissed, her voice trembling. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching the walkie-talkie like a lifeline, waiting for some kind of explanation, some kind of answer. But there was nothing. No more customers, no more orders, just the feeling that something, someone, was watching us, waiting for the last mistake. And then, just as suddenly as it all began, the shaking stopped. The lights flickered once more and then settled into an eerie calm. The whispers vanished. The fryer shut off. The kitchen was silent, save for our ragged breathing. We stayed there, frozen for what felt like hours, listening for any sign that the chaos would begin again. But it didn't. It was as if everything had returned to normal. The walls stopped trembling, the noises stopped, the temperature settled, and then the door to the restaurant opened. It was the manager. He walked in, glancing around at the disarray, his eyes lingering on the mess. His clothes were pristine, as if he hadn't just witnessed what we had. "Well, looks like you all had a rough night." He looked over at the shattered freezer door, the overturned trays in the kitchen, and the scattered utensils, but his expression didn't change. "Did you follow the rules?" he asked, his voice casual, like he was asking if we'd done our usual tasks. We didn't answer at first. Tara and Luis looked like they'd just seen ghosts, and I was too shaken to speak. But I knew the truth. I knew we had all broken the rules at some point, even if it was just a small mistake. The manager nodded, unbothered. "It's not your fault," he said, "but I suggest you be more careful next time." Next time. The thought sent a chill through me. The air was still heavy, the remnants of fear clinging to my skin. I couldn't shake the image of the shadowy figure, the cold sensation of it standing there in front of me. I wanted to ask the manager what was happening, what the rules really meant, but I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to speak. I was too afraid to know the answer. By the time the sun began to rise, we were all too exhausted to think clearly. The events of the night had left us hollow, disconnected. The restaurant was quiet now, eerily so, and we were left standing in the wreckage of what had happened. I stepped outside, blinking into the morning light, my mind still racing. The cool air helped ground me, but I couldn't forget the terror of the night. Tara, Luis, and I exchanged glances. We were all thinking the same thing. The rules were real. They weren't just some story to keep us in line. They were the only thing keeping us alive. And yet, I couldn't shake the question. Why? What was the true purpose of those rules? The morning seemed too calm, too quiet, but I wasn't sure how much of it I could trust. The feeling that I hadn't uncovered everything about this place, about the rules, lingered in the back of my mind. As I walked away from the fast food joint, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd ever be able to leave it behind. And deep down, I knew I was just beginning to understand how little I actually knew about this place. About the rules, and the price of breaking them. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot at all.